Hi, I'm Jennifer Jill Araya.
And I'm Sarah Beth Goer.
Welcome to the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, where we discuss the art and craft of audiobooks, and we aim to go deep quick.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today we have Ron Butler. Ron Butler, but everyone calls him Ronnie. He is an audiobook narrator, coach, and a burgeoning producer and writer. Ronnie, welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's great to finally be here.
Yay!
Taken us a while to get it together. My fault mostly so, but I'm thrilled.
It's not really your fault. I mean, sickness is not really something that we can control.
And I got sick once too, so it's not just you.
But it's yay. It's wonderful to all be here together. And because we are a podcast that likes to go deep quick, I'm going to dive right into the first question, which is, what is one element of the craft of audiobook narration that you are really working on deeply right now?
Me personally.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to say that working as much as possible, this is sort of a two-pronged thing, right? Working as much as possible to narrate from the center of my authentic self, as opposed to my idea of who I am or my idea of how I should sound or how the story should sound. And there's a tension there. And there's always a tension there. I don't think it ever goes away. But because different genres, different styles, different authors require different tones and different approaches, right? The text speaks, right, and has a musicality and has a sound and has a point of view, the text in and of itself. And so, it's part of the job is to honor that, but always making sure that it doesn't become form over substance with regard to my own authenticity. And that's quite a journey because, for all of us, and at any point, if I'm too far off on this tangent, just reel me in.
No.
Right? But if at any point, we all present ourselves to the world. That's sort of we learn armor and we learn coping, and that stays with us and comes with us into our adult lives. And we present ourselves to the world in a certain way. And as artists, part of our job is to make sure we peel that back so that we're presenting ourselves as authentically and as uncovered as possible. I think some of the best artists, for better or for worse, don't have to do that, right? They sort of come out of the gate, completely like that. That was not my journey. My journey was a lot of armor and a lot of covering. And inside that, my talent and my authentic self lived, but not, going through a life performing as an actor first in stage and screen. I discovered that journey because when I first was working, I got offered the same kind of parts because those parts were how I occurred to people, their first take of me. And that wasn't necessarily the core of who I was, but that was who I was comfortable with presenting, however unconsciously, right? And part of my journey was learning how to peel that back. And the more I peeled that back, the more complex, the more varied, the more interesting, the more authentic, I think, I became. And then the more varied the work became. Okay. So that's all backstory to say, stepping into the booth with the book, sometimes I have to constantly go, hey, the shorthand would be, you're sounding very announcery, somebody might say in voiceover, or you're sounding very narratory. It's all smooth. It's all sounding the same. It's because you're on autopilot. You got to sort of shake yourself and slap yourself up a little bit metaphorically when you're in the booth and be like, make sure it's me. Make sure I'm here. Right. And we all have different ways that we do that. But that's the goal. And so I think that's my biggest job in terms of craft, in terms of what I do, and maintaining, trying to hold the line on that, right? I'll give you an example. Last week I did an article, actually. It wasn't a book, it was an article for Apple News. And somebody, and it's a directed session. And I started, and the director was like, this is first of all, can we say how often do we get directed anymore? So yay. Um, but the note after 1 minute into it was, this sounds great, right in the pocket in terms of understanding it and da 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 da. But you sound a little like you're a professor. Can we just get a little bit more of you, like, and what would that be? My friend Gabber would say, yeah, Ronnie in the hot tub. Ronnie, Ronnie, sitting in the living room, yakking it with us on the phone. Just make sure that you are in there and not being overtaken by the style or the idea of how you should sound, which is completely automatic, right? From the years of being that. And so what's not automatic is being grounded, being present, and working on that all the time. And so that was I know how to make that adjustment, right? But the presence of mind to make the adjustment when I'm alone is the task that's always at hand, right? So it's a very long answer to your question.
No, but that's a really interesting answer. So I just got back from attending VO Atlanta, and in all of the commercial sessions and breakout discussions and so forth, there was a lot of conversation about the conversational read, is what they were calling it, that you didn't want to sound announcery or salesy, that it needed to be a conversational read. And I think in audiobooks, that conversational read equivalent would be exactly what you're talking about in terms of an authentic read. And I also think it's even more important in audiobooks than it might be in commercials, although I don't know because I'm not really a commercial VO. But when you're doing something as long form as an audiobook, if you're not truly authentic, maybe in the first couple minutes it might not be apparent, or even in the first few chapters it might not be apparent, but the listener will eventually be able to tell over the course of a hours-long audiobook if you're not really bringing your authentic self. And that then, changes the experience of the audiobook if you're not real.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't know if every listener is that dialed in, but I want to work as though I work assuming that they all are,
Yeah.
right?
I think on a subconscious level, they'll be able to tell it, even if they couldn't say that's the problem.
Yeah. I agree with you entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really moved, if I were going to extract two really clear points from what you shared, would be, hey, when we're saying like conversational read, what that's really code for is like go deep inside yourself and do the work you need to do to strip down your defenses and share your authentic heart and soul vulnerably, which I think is such a meaningful and important point. And the other, which is really fascinating, is like, so we're sharing our soul, but it needs to be like through the
the lens of the book.
Exactly. Which I do want to follow up. Like, do you have any advice to someone that's like, okay, I kind of like, I went to a bunch of therapy and I kind of understand how to share my authentic soul, but no, how do I do it like with this character who's so different from me, or this circumstance that I haven't lived? Or do you have any like advice for that question?
That's a really great question. My short answer is I'm not sure. I have an answer.
We're figuring it out.
Yeah.
The original question is, what are you working on? So you're working on it.
Here, and I don't want to be, forgive me if I'm being too pedantic, but I'm going to go back to sort of acting roots and say that, one of the mantras that I learned when I was training was, what we're doing is we're living truthfully under imaginary circumstances.
Yes, Meisner.
Yes, right? Exactly. So, the book is the imaginary circumstance, right? The wardrobe is the imaginary circumstance. All the things, if you're when you're sort of acting live, you've got your physicality, you've got the clothes you're wearing, you've got the way that you move, that all help give the illusion of the place and the time and the period and all those things. And then you have to be, Jennifer, or you have to be Sarah inside all of that, right? When we do audiobooks, it's like we sort of have to do that as the narrator in the exposition, right? In the exposition, in all those places where, say, there's not dialogue, we are responsible for shaping and crafting the world, inhabiting the world. And when we speak, we have to make sure that when it is time to speak, that we're still living truthfully, even with all that stuff that we've created.
Yeah.
Now, how you do that, I think, is a journey of experience. It's not like I don't think the three of us together could come up with, okay, this is how you do it, and then someone could just like take the template and do it. It is work. It is work. It's doing it, and it's studying, it's taking classes and having people go, oh, this is where you sort of, this is where you were writing the line perfectly, and this is where you fell over into doing the idea of it as opposed to being you in the world, right? It just takes feedback and trial and error and work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Practice the same way that yoga can be a practice.
Exactly. It is a practice. And you know what? And I just want to underscore, it's okay for it to be a practice. Like, it's okay. It's always a practice. I think I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because I have to remind myself of that it is a practice. It's not, it's not going to be perfect. And it's not going to be right every single time. It's a practice, and you do your best, and you do your best in the practice. I sometimes, I used to look at, like musicians and models and comedians when they would get like TV shows, and I think, oh my gosh, like I know so many people. I know so many people who are better performers than those people, right? But these people have the opportunity, and they have no shame or guilt or remorse about the fact that they're learning. They're getting paid, but they're learning, right? They're practicing. They just happen to be lucky enough to be getting paid to practice, and they have enough of an ego or egoless that it doesn't bother them that they're doing it in front of the world. I think that struck me, because I thought, yeah, it's okay to be in progress, right? It's okay to be in progress. And maybe it's about always being in progress, and being comfortable with that and living in that.
Yeah.
Although I have a much more cynical view than you, I think that like half those performers don't even realize that there is a skill there that they're like pooping all over. And the other half are probably deeply insecure. Like, I will never forget, I was in an acting class with one of those lucky people but she was keenly aware that she didn't have the skill, but she was lucky in getting paid. But she was like, it was hard. And she, it's, if you are aware, it can be maybe some of those people are just have that beautiful balance of like that I would hope that we would all attain of like, I'm aware it's a practice, and you know what? I'm enough in this practice. So I wish that for everyone.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Well, speaking of being in practice, Ronnie, I hear that you are expanding your literary practice from narration into writing. And I know that you're currently co-writing an audio-first serial romance with fellow narrators Gabra Zachman and Emily Wu Zeller. And I would love to know how your knowledge of the craft of narration, what we were just talking about, is influencing your writing on this project, and also how your new experience as a writer is informing your work as a narrator. How are those two playing together?
Wow, thank you for asking. Just very briefly, it's a collaboration that came to me. Gabra and Emily have a collective called Love Bites, and within that they create a lot of different creative things, a lot of different projects. And one of them is called Nice and Naughty, and it's a serialized romance, and written specifically to be narrated, which I think is the difference, because most of us read stuff that wasn't written to be read out loud, right, as the primary source. And they invited me to narrate in something in the second season, and then that character they wanted to feature in the third season. And they said, would you consider writing that character's stuff, 5 of the 10 episodes? So I sent them some examples, and they said, this is great, please play with us. And so I'm very grateful for that. The shorthand is just really quick and dirty, which is like, we know when people write stuff that's really hard to say and to wrap your mouth around, and you just, when you write, you go, oh yeah, I'm not going to write that. That's going to be too hard to say. Like, no one speaks like that. You know, how many times have you been in the booth when you're like, nobody talks like this, right? You know, and you have to like figure out how to wrap your mouth around it, or where you put a pause, or where you can, you know, lift something so that you can actually get the sentence out like it's like it sounds remotely like a human being might say it. So primarily it's avoiding all that stuff, right? Being do you not overuse the word conversational, but being as conversational as possible in the approach in terms of, you know, normal human discourse, right? That's the thing. And also too, I think avoiding, I want to say, because this is the world of romance, which I do a lot of, and I have a high respect for it, is just not making sure it gets too, you know, too flowery in this. And what I mean by that is just too intellectualized, that it's always about what characters are thinking and feeling, and focusing on what I would say is it showing, not telling? Is that what it is? Yeah. From a writing point of view. So having characters take action and say things that are active and that move things along, as opposed to telling you with their thoughts or telling you with the exposition what they're feeling and what they're doing. And I think that's much more interesting. And that's what this process from narrating, because I go, oh, we're going, you know, you've been in a book and you're like, we're telling you, you're talking on and on and on about it. But when are we going to do something? Right. And so that's what I take in that direction. Now, coming in the opposite direction, what is the writing doing with the way I narrate is having having a better understanding of why sometimes it's really difficult to write something when you're writing something that's about, you know, that's about a complex emotional life, you know, or a complex emotional experience that two characters are having. Sometimes it's people don't have words for that, and exactly what's the beauty of beautiful prose, the wonder of beautiful prose, is that it's able to, like poetry, elevate those experiences and give us different ways to look into it. And sometimes you need that in order to, you know, in order to tell a story, or because you want the listener to have an experience that's elevated in some way, more so than just the basic interaction. And so it's giving me more compassion, might be the wrong word, but more, right? More of an understanding of why, of the beauty of literature, and the necessity of beautiful prose, and gives me more appreciation and love for it. So that's the way it works in reverse. I don't know if has it helped, does it help me narrate? I don't know if it necessarily helps me narrate any better, any more so than, it's difficult because I've been in the storytelling world for so long and accumulated sort of so much experience. I'm not sure what's influencing me where, but.
Sure. Well, I think understanding some of the motives of an author, because you are now an author yourself, has to help you as you're communicating that intent to the listener.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Well, turning to some more details of what exactly you're doing when you're in your booth with your hands in the metaphorical clay.
Yes.
I'm curious to know, well, we are curious to know, when you're recording, can you describe where and how you're focusing? Like, are you aware of your body, or are you imagining the world in your head? Does your focus shift depending on whether you're performing dialogue or narration? Where is your focus?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, it varies a little bit with the book, you know, but I would say in general, which is the enemy of art, but in general, I would say that I experience narration and working in the booth like I'm in the movie, the film of the book. And so I see the world and what's happening in the book in front of me in my imagination as I move through it. And so my process is to discover the book as though I don't know it already, right? Do you know what I mean? We've all read the book, we've all read the script, we've all read the play. We know what's going to happen, and yet we have to act as though we don't know, right? That when we say the next line that our partner's going to turn around and walk out the door and slam it behind them, right? And so I try to imagine the presentness of the moment in a cinematic way. And that's my experience as I narrate. Whether it is exposition or narration, as you say, or dialogue, right? That sort of present moment discovery, and even with that third eye in the back that always knows where we're going, that has the rudder of the storyteller going, okay, this is where the scene peaks, this is where it closes, this is where I button, in that world, still living in, okay, what's next? I'm going to discover this, and I'm going to see it as I read it, so that I'm almost experiencing it for the first time. So I'm actually having an experience in the booth. I'm having an experience as I narrate. I'm not just telling the story off the page. I'm hopefully living the story. And that to me is much more interesting and much more exciting for me as a performer, right?
Mm-hmm. I heard a metaphor at one of the workshops in LA right around the Audies that I think really relates to what you were talking about. It was a metaphor from Marnie Penning, who we actually have interviewed on this podcast before, but she talked about narrating a scene in an audiobook a little bit like riding a roller coaster. So while you're on the ground, you're looking at that roller coaster and you can see the peaks and the valleys, sort of like you were saying, you can see where the scene is going and where the climax is and how it resolves. But then getting on the roller coaster and riding the roller coaster is a much more visceral experience. And that to me relates very much to what you were just saying about, what's happening in the scene, what's going to happen, what's coming, but you have to stay in that moment of discovery with the listener and allow that fresh realization to inform how you're delivering that text. It's the difference between looking at a roller coaster versus actually riding a roller coaster.
I think it's a wonderful metaphor. I love that. I love it. Yeah. But I entirely agree. I tend to be a heady person in general. And so as we were talking about with your first question, when we first started talking, my challenge, and the challenge I give myself always, is to, can I get more in my body? Can I get more in my body? Can I get more in my body? And so I've noticed lately within the past couple of months that I'm checking in much more physically with my breath while I'm narrating. Like I feel, as if I'm in something that's a scene or a chapter where there's a lot of tension, I will find myself hunching my shoulders, and all of a sudden my shoulders are at my ears, but I'm conscious now, and I go, oh, loosen, stay loose, because the instrument needs to be loose for stuff to come in and out. And so I'm much more and more in my body, particularly though with dialogue and characters. I'm much more aware of my body, because I place the voice placement, the character voice placement that I may choose is a very physical thing, and I often have other physicalities that go along with it, whether it's literally my position around the mic, where my shoulders are, where my head might be tilted. All those things, they're very specific for each character that's speaking. And so I do find myself changing physically while I'm in the booth, when I'm narrating, much more so for dialogue, because I'm doing a lot of physical things. That helps me a lot.
How do you negotiate the physical changes you need to be purposefully doing for character voices to come through, with wanting to immerse in the scene and have it feel, cinematic, that those two people are really talking to each other, or those four people are really talking to each other? Like, how do you navigate that for yourself? The technicality of being aware of the physicality, but the skill of being totally immersed in the moment.
I think it's a self-conscious and heady thing for like the first page or two, or for the first few times that character appears in the book. And once it's in your body, I think your muscle memory takes over. And then you have to trust that you've done it, that it's there, and then you just sort of go for it. And all you need is the reminder. All I need, I should say, is the reminder of, it's Detective Barry, and I lean a little forward and I tilt my chin a little bit to the left, and I pitch my voice just slightly up, and she's there, right? And once I've done that a couple of times, I just trust that it's there, and I just move, and I just trust myself. That's my answer. I'm sorry, it's not.
I think that's a fabulous answer. And I also find it really insightful. It's wonderful to hear people who have been, such as yourself, who are so skilled, who have been doing this for so long, who are so well considered, say like, hey, like even for me, for the first few pages, it has to be conscious.
Yeah.
And I imagine that for a beginning narrator, maybe it has to be conscious for the first 50 books. I don't know, and that the skill builds. And so your body knows how to do it more.
Absolutely.
And more.
I remember one of the first romance books I ever did, and I'd never done romance before. And this is true. This is true for me across the board. There are a lot of times, every time I had done a new genre or something new, I'd never listened to anybody else do anything in that genre before. And I also did not listen to any of the rules about what people did or were not supposed to do in that genre. And as a result, I did make some mistakes, but I think the freedom that I had by not being encumbered by that stuff was really beneficial for me. I don't think that's necessarily the best journey for everybody, but it really was for me. So the first romance book that I had, of course, there were 3 brothers. They were all within like a year or 2 of each other. They all had deep, husky voices, right? And so that was a challenge for me. And I was hyper conscious and it was a trilogy of books. It was a trilogy. And so I was hyper conscious of that whole time of placement and position and of sound, because I got called out in a review for the lack thereof. But that was a part of my education. And then I was like, okay, I have to really be conscious of this, and it's work. And for the first however many books, it's going to be work. It's a new skill set of really, because I think before that I'd done an awful lot of nonfiction, and also I'd done an awful lot of just lit fiction, but where there was mostly just male, female. It wasn't like, this sense where you have these characters that are so close and described so similarly, and yet you are responsible for making sure that the listener can differentiate. And also too, understanding the level of both the extraordinary variance that you can have with creating that stuff, that it's not always the huge stuff. It's not always the external stuff. That was something too, that it took me a while to learn, was that some of these character differences that we're working toward, are also internal. Their intention, their characters have through lines. And if you also, you can go in that direction and say, what does this character want for this whole book? What is this character striving for? And how does that play out in the way they sound, in their cadence, in their pace? Those things which are start from an internal place, which is eventually where I got to. So it's a combination of inside and out. And I'm pretty sure I've strayed very far from the original question.
No,
but I'm back here.
Not at all.
These are the juicy details we love here on Crafting Audiobooks.
For sure. And I love that you talk about this as a skill that needs to be learned. It sort of gets back to what we were talking about with narration being a practice. And sometimes these skills need to be consciously honed and practiced before we can begin to trust them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's definitely a cliche that people say, oh, you never stop learning, and even the best actors or the best narrators are in, still taking classes. And well, that's not always true. I mean, you've all been in acting classes. When was the last time you were in an acting class and Sir Ian McKellen walked in? You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, I'm just going to do a scene today. It doesn't, you know what I mean? But I have found for me, when I come up against obstacles meaning when I come up against, I really want to work in this area. I really want to do this thing. And why am I not getting that? Where am I still sort of closed off, to go back to what we talked about in the beginning? Where am I still covered? And I have found that I've had to go back and get coaching and have feedback about, this is what I'm not hearing, or this is what I'm hearing. Can you do this? It is, um, the more we know ourselves, the slipperier those coping mechanisms for hiding and not being vulnerable become, right? The sneakier and more sophisticated they get. And so, um, that, if you want to go there, and not everybody works that way. I work that way. But if you want to go there, then that's where you go. In order, it requires for me, to be brutally honest, it requires, grappling with my ego and my fear of not being enough and not having been perfect out of the gate, and having to face that in order to say, I need help learning how to be better here, even in this thing that I've been doing for 10 years or however long, you know. Um,
Sure.
but I think that journey for me is valuable on many levels, not just the professional one. And so I'm willing to take it.
Love it.
Yep.
I think that's what makes a real artist. And maybe Sir Ian McKellen is not, dropping in on acting class, but maybe he's still working on himself and
Sure.
becoming a deeper and deeper
Don't
human.
ask me why. Probably because I was, I was like, why did Ian McKellen? I was in my head. I was picturing. Who was I picturing? I can't even think of his name. This is why and I was like, Anthony Hopkins. I was thinking Sir Anthony Hopkins. I was picturing Anthony Hopkins because I was like, everybody's going to say Meryl Streep. I'm not going to go for Meryl Streep. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't know their processes. All we know is our own. It'd be great to have a round table, that are, oh my gosh, did you ever see, there used to be this really interesting show on IFC. This was years ago. I'm going to say this is years ago. You guys are probably in high school when this show was on TV. It was called Dinner for Five. And it was where five people in Hollywood, directors, producers, actors, would just sit around a table and have dinner, have a meal, and just talk, right? And yeah, and you learn a lot about exactly what we're talking about. That people at different stages of regardless of their stage of career, still face obstacles, and how they work to surmount those obstacles. You know.
Yeah. The working on the craft never goes away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, along those lines, Ronnie, we've reached our final question that I think fits really well with what we've been talking
Have you
about.
been talking that long? Have I been talking that long?
So our final question, all three of us are going to answer, but Ronnie, I'd love to know first for you. We've been talking a lot today explicitly about the craft of audiobooks, and I would love to know, what is exciting to you about the craft of audiobooks right now, today? Like, where do you find joy in audiobook narration?
Oh, goodness. Let me think about that. It's interesting. I have two sort of knee-jerk reactions. My first is that I find joy and excitement in the same place in terms of craft as that I did when I first started, which is that in the book where you are the only narrator, that you are doing every job as though you're a one-person show, and that the craft means that you have to understand the story well enough to direct it, that you have to give each character their due and their honor by striving to get what they want in the story, and that you have to be the cinematographer and paint the pictures of the world as the writer has seen them. And to do all those things, I think, is tremendously challenging and tremendously fulfilling when you do it. And that hasn't changed, regardless of sort of like, I don't know, styles or demands or genres or whatever, I think that job is still the same when you're one person doing a book. And I find it thrilling and fulfilling, which is why I still do it, because every day is a lesson and every day is a different kind of challenge. I do think there's a lot more sort of multicast things happening these days, and sometimes too sort of like stuff that's done almost as radio plays live with groups of people, and that in terms of what's happening in our world and in the craft, I find very exciting as well, because it's like it's like being back on stage and being able to actually act with other people, still within this world of audiobooks that we love. And I find that trend to be also really, really thrilling and fulfilling. I mean, I walk out of the booth after something like that and I'm just jazzed, I'm just tingly. It's nice. So that's my answer. Those are my answers.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
What are
Sarah,
yours?
what's exciting? Oh, yeah. Sarah, what about you? What's exciting you about the craft today?
Well, I was very excited, Ronnie, when you mentioned living truthfully under imaginary circumstances, because that is a line of the great American acting teacher Sanford Meisner's, and I am Meisner obsessed. And actually, the point I brought to the podcast today is also a Meisner point, which is he would talk about an actor's emotion being like a river, and the words of the text being like a canoe floating over the river, and that you had to get the river going and flowing before a scene began, so that like when you put the canoe, aka the text, on top, it was already filled with all of this emotion. And so I think about that when I am at the top of a chapter. Like, how do I get the engine kind of running so that there's not like a warm up for the listener in the first few sentences of each chapter. And so I'm just sort of reveling in that, the enjoyable experience of that today. And then I have a little nerdy sort of technical offshoot of that, is like, okay, so it's very obvious, like the chapter starts, what's happening emotionally at the top of the scene. Let me get that river flowing. But what about when the author has named the chapter, like given the chapter a name, and the title of the chapter is a foreshadowing of something that happens later, not what's happening at the top of the chapter? I'm like, ooh, do I like emotionally prepare? Like, because I like to, bring that touch of emotion to the chapter heading. And so do I prepare for like the foreshadowed thing? And I've decided, yes, I do. I prepare twice, because the author has given that foreshadowing title to create a particular mood. And this is a subtle thing. Like I don't want to like bring this like moody, heavy, like, right. I don't want to push the emotion onto the audience, but just this like sort of subtle, energetic feel. And so I've decided, yes, when that happens, I need to prepare twice. I need to prepare for the chapter heading that is like the emotion of the foreshadowed thing, and then re-prepare for the top of the chapter. So that's my little nerdy excitement today.
Wow.
So at VO Atlanta, and I wish I could remember the title of the book or the narrator, but Vikas Adam was talking about point of view in books, specifically third person limited, where it's switching between books. And he was talking about a book that he listened to where from one chapter to another, it was a thriller. It switched from the POV of the serial killer to the POV of the detective who was pursuing the serial killer. And by chapter, it would go back and forth. And the narrator of this book that Vikas was listening to would do the chapter heading in the perspective of either the serial killer or the detective. So you could tell just from like chapter 1 to chapter 2, you could tell by the way that the narrator was doing those chapter headings, which character was going to be the limited third person POV for the coming chapter. And just really sinking into that from the very first word of the chapter. It's really cool. It's something I'm not sure I would have thought of.
I love that. I don't get very many books where I have a chapter heading other than chapter 1. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's less common for sure. Yeah.
But I love
find
that.
honestly a lot of YA and middle grade still have word titles. Yeah.
I've got one of my romance authors liked to do it, and I was doing a thriller that liked to do it, which was kind of fun because it's like she likes to set like the mood for like what might happen in this chapter,
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, I love that. Oh man, that's great stuff. That's really good stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
I was just gonna say I like doing books where the third person POV switches back and forth sort of along with the character. I really enjoy that. I actually really enjoy that. Yeah.
What do you enjoy about it in particular?
I like being in the head of that person. I like that the author is gonna give us the not just what they're thinking about themselves and the choices that they're going to make, but the way they literally see the world, like literally what they choose to highlight when they look out the window, what they feel, what physical sensations they feel, do they notice the breeze? Do they notice these things? All those things that are exposition, but when played through the lens of that character's POV, can be really interesting, and you see how good an author really is because you see the differences between what they highlight in terms of sensory information, or what I would call like exposition, the narration from one chapter on, from one character's POV for the other. And if they're doing it on that level, then they really know what they're doing, and I enjoy that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. How they see the world. Really good.
Allowing us through the craft of narration to sink into the craft of writing.
Yeah. It's so juicy. I love it.
Jennifer, what's exciting you today?
Sure. So I made some notes like I always do about the things I'm excited about, but I'm going to completely change my answer from my notes because talking with Ronnie has given me a new excitement for the practice of narration, that it is an ongoing journey. So I've mentioned that I just got back from VO Atlanta. I was one of the presenters in the audiobook track. And actually, Ronnie, the very first time that you and I met, I don't know that you even remember, this was like 6 or 7 years ago.
At VO Atlanta.
At VO Atlanta, exactly. And just sort of talking to you and thinking back on my experience presenting there this past weekend, and then talking to you now about all of the sorts of things that we talked about then when I was there years ago, and you were one of the presenters. It just brings home to me that regardless of where you are in your narration journey, there is still so much to learn, and that you still have value regardless of that experience level. And again, that it is a practice, it is a journey, and it's not something that's ever done, but it's something that is exciting in the process. And there's joy and there's delight in that. The old cliche, find joy in the journey, but I think there really is joy in the craft of the audiobook journey. And yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you both about that today. It's got me feeling very excited at the moment.
No, I said it when you first said it. It's really an incredible gem of a nugget. And I think I want to make a little post-it and put it up here on my screen in my booth, because there's so much freedom in accepting the fact that it's a practice, and that it's not finished. And for me, there is great freedom. There's great freedom there, and there's an ability to, loosen the grip and allow more flow, and be more present. Both for the creative journey and also for the educational one as they come. So thank you. I think that was a lovely moment of insight when you said that.
Absolutely.
When you were talking, Sarah, at one point I was just going to interrupt you and go, "You're scratching your forehead." And I was like, I'm going to say that, and I'm going to see if she gives me a Meisner repetition in response, or if she'll even get it.
That would have been fun.
I was like, no, I'm not going to interrupt. I'm just being silly just because I can be. Let her finish your point.
But okay, so since you brought up Meisner again, I do want to say, I think why I'm so Meisner obsessed. Earlier in the episode, you talked about how you've been a person in your head, and that you are sinking more and more into your body. And I think Sanford Meisner was a genius who knew how to be like, okay, you're in your head. Let me give you a step-by-step, like head-based explanation of how to get into your body.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I'm so obsessed with Meisner's technique.
Yeah. And also too, that the putting your, like the way to get out of your head and to be less self-conscious is to put your attention outward, and the practice of putting your attention on the other person. And in our context and what we're doing here, I would say that that's the attention of not what experience am I having, which we sort of touched on a little bit in answer to some of the other questions, but making sure that I'm telling the story of this character, and whatever comes up while I'm doing it, let it roll,
Absolutely.
I love those moments. I love those moments when you're narrating and a particular character gets emotional and the writer says they're emotional, and so you are writing that wave and telling that story, and when you get to a point where it's free enough that it just sort of happens, and afterwards you finish and you're like, oh my God, that all happened, and I was there for it, wow, those are really exciting. Those are really exciting moments. Yeah.
Well, Ronnie, this conversation has been a true delight. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so glad we finally got this interview scheduled.
No, thank you.
It happened exactly when it was meant to happen, I think.
Thank you both. This is really, really great. Really, really great. I mean, really.
Yay, I'm glad you enjoyed.
No, I did. I really, really did. This was really lovely. I can't wait. Please make sure I know, how to tag you and find it and share it and do all that kind of stuff, because it's been a really lovely time with you this morning today. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Crafting Audiobooks. We've been your hosts, Jennifer Jill Araya
and Sarah Beth Goer,
wishing you happy audiobook listening and/or crafting.
Bye for now.